I own this city.
Well, I'm the Reaper Man. And you're out of business.
Quick! Change the channel!
Are you men enough to fight with me?
Anyone who opposes me will be destroyed.
The 1994 Street Fighter movie may have been torn apart by critics and longtime fans of the games, but it still managed to become a somewhat commercial success, earning back more than double its budget. What audiences didn't see, though, was the production hell behind the scenes. Filming in brutal heat and humidity that wore down the cast, Jean-Claude Van Damme's erratic behavior fueled by substance abuse, and Capcom's constant interference, insisting that every character from the games be squeezed into an already tight runtime. And while the movie's financial performance briefly sparked plans for sequels, those ideas eventually collapsed, leading the franchise toward a full reboot with Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, a film that ended up performing even worse and cementing the original's strange legacy as both a mess and a minor miracle. In this deep dive, we'll unpack all of that chaos and more, tracing how the 1994 Street Fighter became a perfect storm of ambition, mismanagement, and sheer unpredictability. By the end, you'll see exactly why this movie remains such a fascinating mix of disaster, determination, and accidental legacy. So without further ado, let's get into it. Raul Julia took the role of Bison mainly because his children loved the Street Fighter video games, and he wanted to make a movie they could enjoy together. To bring the character to life, he studied real-world dictators and crime bosses to understand how powerful, feared people behave. He borrowed Benito Mussolini's bold hand gestures, Joseph Stalin's cold, controlled mannerisms, Pablo Escobar's slippery, hard-to-catch presence, and even Adolf Hitler's obsession with art, blending all of these traits into Bison's personality. At the same time, Julia approached the role like a Shakespearean villain, treating Bison as a larger-than-life figure similar to Richard III, which helped him deliver a performance that was theatrical, commanding, and memorable. Despite his illness during filming, the movie eventually became Julia's last theatrical appearance, as he tragically died soon after filming was complete following a battle with stomach cancer, and the film was dedicated to him, with the closing title card reading, "For Raul, Vaya con Dios," which translates from Spanish to "Go with God." Jean-Claude Van Damme's time on the movie was notoriously difficult for the cast and crew, as his rising fame, strong ego, and heavy substance abuse made him unpredictable and hard to manage. Even though he was given a luxurious presidential suite with a private gym, he often refused to leave his hotel or trailer until he felt like working, and when he did show up, he might bring alcohol to set or take hours to film simple scenes. In sharp contrast, Kylie Minogue earned universal praise for being professional, kind, and generous, even renting out a club and buying drinks for everyone to lift spirits during the stressful shoot. Raul Julia was equally beloved. Despite being terminally ill with stomach cancer and visibly frail, he stayed focused, remained warm and playful with the crew, and brought a sense of dignity to the production while accompanied by his family. Van Damme later admitted he had been using around $10,000 worth of cocaine a week during filming and had an affair with Minogue, and director Steven D'Souza confirmed years later that the actor's addiction caused constant delays, made worse by the fact that the studio-assigned wrangler meant to keep him in line was a bad influence himself, leading to frequent sick calls, disappearances, and late arrivals that forced the crew to constantly reshuffle the shooting schedule. The movie includes a number of Easter eggs for longtime fans of the games to notice. The gold statue in Sagat's business parlor is actually the very same reclining Buddha statue that appears in Sagat's classic stage, starting all the way back in Street Fighter II: The World Warrior in 1991. The final scene where all the heroes strike their signature poses together is a live-action recreation of famous images from the games, specifically the post-credits screen in Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers and Super Street Fighter II Turbo, where every character appears on screen at the same time doing their win animation. During the opening moments of the Guile vs. Bison final battle, both characters use their win quotes from the Super Nintendo version of Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. Guile delivers his classic line,
"Are you men enough to fight with me?"
while Bison responds with his own iconic threat,
Anyone who opposes me will be destroyed.
By slipping these audio cues into the scene, the filmmakers created a subtle tribute to the original game, letting longtime players instantly recognize the familiar dialogue and feel a stronger connection between the movie and its source material. In the magic trick scene where Chun-Li is put in a barrel and then made to disappear, you can see the word Capcom printed in red on top of the barrel lid, which is a nod to Capcom, the company that created and published the Street Fighter video game series. The controls built into Bison's floating desk are real video game controls taken from Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers and Super Street Fighter II: Turbo. Instead of designing a futuristic control panel, the filmmakers used the same joystick and button layout players would recognize from the arcade games. The oil painting in Bison's private quarters showing a frowning clown holding balloons and wearing Bison's cap is meant as a dark visual joke because it directly references the unsettling Pogo the Clown paintings created by serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who was infamous for performing as a clown before his crimes were discovered. The movie's version mimics Gacy's style but replaces the clown's hat with Bison's own, turning the portrait into a creepy in-universe homage that hints at Bison's twisted ego and taste for disturbing imagery. Capcom created a Street Fighter game based directly on the 1994 movie, and instead of using traditional hand-drawn sprites like the main series, they filmed the actual actors from the film performing moves and digitized their images into the game, giving it a visual style very similar to the early Mortal Kombat titles, which were famous for using real actors as in-game characters. This meant that each movie performer, such as Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile and Ming-Na Wen as Chun-Li, appeared in the game as their on-screen versions of the characters. The result was a unique, somewhat experimental entry in the franchise that blended Hollywood presentation with arcade-style gameplay, standing out as one of Capcom's most unusual tie-in projects. The movie's final amphibious attack on Bison's compound was originally written as a large air assault, but because the scene was being filmed in Thailand, the Thai government refused to allow the production to use its airspace for the many aircraft the sequence required, forcing the filmmakers to completely rethink the climax. As a result, they changed the plan to a boat-based assault instead. This behind-the-scenes limitation is quietly acknowledged in the film itself through Guile's line,
"An attack from the air is impossible,"
which acts as a subtle wink to the audience about why the final battle looks different from what was originally intended. Jean-Claude Van Damme revealed in an online MTV interview that he had been offered the chance to return as Guile for Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li, which would have made him the only cast member from the 1994 film to reprise a role, but he turned it down, saying he no longer wanted to take on projects that would make him unhappy. The Legend of Chun-Li was intended to be a stronger, more successful take on the franchise, yet it earned far less at the box office and was widely considered an even worse film by fans and critics. It was also alleged that early plans for a sequel would have revealed that Blanca and Dalsim survived the events of the 1994 film, with Dalsim's chemical exposure not only causing his baldness, but also giving him his trademark stretching powers, tying the movie version of the character closer to his game counterpart. Ming-Na Wen later explained that when she first saw the finished movie, she cringed and genuinely worried it might ruin her career, even telling her ER co-star George Clooney that she feared it was over for her. Clooney jokingly reassured her saying, "Oh honey, it takes a lot to kill a career. I should know," hinting at his own experience starring in the critically panned film Return of the Killer Tomatoes. Wen eventually came to look back on the film with fond memories, appreciating the experience despite her early embarrassment. Capcom's deep involvement in the movie meant that every major production decision required their approval, and because they insisted on a December 1994 release, the cast and crew had to work under a very tight and demanding schedule to finish the film on time. Capcom had always imagined Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile, so they pushed for his casting, but securing him came at a huge cost. His salary alone was nearly $8 million out of the film's $35 million budget, leaving less than 2/3 of the budget for everything else. Once Raul Julia was cast as Bison, most of the remaining casting money was gone, which meant that nearly all other roles had to be filled by little-known or completely unknown actors, shaping the film's ensemble in a very budget-driven way. This combination of strict studio oversight, a rushed timeline, and uneven resource distribution heavily influenced how the movie ultimately came together. Ironically, according to Steven D'Souza, Capcom loved the movie. Filming in Thailand made the production fall into trouble almost immediately and was extremely tough for the cast and crew. By the 10th day of filming, the crew was already 6 days behind schedule, as the hot, humid weather caused many people to lose weight, only for them to gain it back quickly once production moved to the much milder climate in Australia. Political tension made things worse. When a possible coup led the military to shut down all roads, everyone had to travel to set by high-speed boats, often arriving soaking wet before a full day of shooting. Even the buildings caused problems. The structure used as the Allied nations' headquarters had a tin roof full of holes, so rain created deafening noise that ruined audio, and bright sunlight streamed through the gaps on clear days, making filming nearly impossible. Whenever producers confronted director Steven D'Souza about the delays, he used what he jokingly called the old John Ford trick, where he would literally tear pages out of the script to speed things up, cutting scenes on the spot so the team could catch up. This quick-fix approach helped in the moment, but it created bigger problems later. When editing began, D'Souza discovered that important story scenes were missing and that many of the fight sequences lacked proper flow or continuity. To repair the damage, the production had to rebuild sets in Vancouver and bring the cast back for reshoots, adding even more strain to an already difficult film. Although the first Street Fighter movie may have been critically panned, it still made a solid profit, which is why Jean-Claude Van Damme began working on a sequel in 2003 called Street Fighter II. Reports at the time claimed that several actors were already being considered, including Dolph Lundgren in an unspecified role, Holly Valance replacing Kylie Minogue as Cammy, Damian Chapa returning as Ken, and Byron Mann in talks to return as Ryu. Despite this early momentum, however, the project stalled for years and never moved into production. Eventually, the rights shifted to 20th Century Fox, and instead of continuing Van Damme's storyline, the studio chose to scrap the sequel entirely and reboot the franchise with Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li in 2009, ending any chance of the original cast returning for a follow-up. In the Street Fighter games, Ryu and Ken are traditionally the main heroes, but the 1994 movie shifts the spotlight to Guile to make the story more appealing to Western audiences, who were more familiar with Jean-Claude Van Damme as an action star. This same choice was later reused in Street Fighter: The Animated Series, which also centered the story around Guile, rather than the two martial artist protagonists from the games. Despite these changes, a few character backstory elements stayed faithful to both Street Fighter II canon and the animated series. Guile's vendetta against Bison for the disappearance of his friend Charlie, Chun-Li's quest for justice after Bison murdered her heroic father, and Bison's role as the dictatorial main villain who stands at the top of all antagonists. These were the only major story threads that carried over accurately, while most other character roles and relationships were heavily altered for the film's new narrative focus. The first submitted cut of the film was given an R rating by the MPAA, which was a major problem for Capcom, because they had insisted from the beginning that the movie needed to be PG-13 to match the game's teen audience. After the filmmakers trimmed scenes to reduce violence, the MPAA swung too far in the opposite direction and issued a G rating, which director Steven D'Souza called the kiss of death, since teenagers generally avoid G-rated films. To push the rating back up to the desired PG-13, the team added a single expletive from Jean-Claude Van Damme during post-production, which was enough to secure the rating Capcom wanted. The film's poor reviews didn't stop it from becoming a box office success, earning $33 million in the US and $66 million worldwide, more than doubling its $35 million budget. And that financial win had an unexpected effect on Jean-Claude Van Damme's career. Feeling emboldened by a streak of profitable action films and his $8 million paycheck for Street Fighter, he was offered a 3-picture deal in 1995 at $12 million per movie, but he refused and demanded $20 million per film, matching Jim Carrey's then-record salary, even though Carrey's movies were earning 3 times more than Van Damme's. The studio immediately cut ties, and Van Damme later admitted he made the demand while heavily using alcohol and cocaine, saying it was less about money and more about trying to cement his status in Hollywood. Instead, the move badly damaged his reputation, and when combined with later drug problems and violent incidents, it led to fewer offers, shrinking budgets, and a long decline in his career momentum. Capcom's heavy involvement in the movie meant director Steven D'Souza needed their approval for almost every creative choice, and this became especially challenging when it came to the number of characters. D'Souza originally wanted to focus on 7 core fighters from Street Fighter II, the World Warrior, believing that was the most a 100-minute film could handle without confusing the audience. Capcom, however, pushed him to include all 16 characters from Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers, basing their requests largely on each character's popularity. This pressure led to many fighters appearing only briefly or in reduced roles, a pattern that even showed up in the Street Fighter II animated movie, released a few months before the film, where several characters also had minimal screen time. The temple scene in the film was actually a full exterior set built by the art department, and the plan during filming was to safely destroy only about 25% of it for the explosion scene, since Jean-Claude Van Damme, Kylie Minogue, and several other actors were standing very close to the structure. But when the explosives went off, the effect spiraled out of control, causing the entire set to erupt in flames instead of just a small section. The fire burned so intensely that it destroyed roughly $240,000 worth of scaffolding, far more damage than intended. Because the explosion looked dramatic and couldn't be recreated, the production kept the shot, and it appears in the final cut of the movie. Dalsim in the Street Fighter games is known as a mystical yoga master, bald, lightly dressed, and able to stretch his arms and legs several times their normal length to attack from far away. The 1994 film completely reimagines him as Dr. Dalsim, a scientist with no visual or supernatural resemblance to the character fans know, and he only begins to look closer to his game counterpart in his final scene with Guile. However, the movie includes a small hint toward his classic abilities in an earlier scene, when his arm is splashed with chemicals, which may be a subtle nod or foreshadowing to the stretchy limb powers he has in the games. And that wraps up this deep dive into Street Fighter, a movie that's equal parts baffling, brilliant, and endlessly quotable. It's a reminder that even the wildest productions can become cult legends. So if you enjoyed peeling back the layers of this beautiful disaster, make sure to stick around, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more behind-the-scenes stories and adaptation breakdowns coming your way. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay sharp, and we'll see you in the next video.